what I was hoping we might talk about is self-deception. So in other parts of the course we talk about people's ability to detect when other people are lying to us. But how is it that we actually develop the skills to get away with lying? And what does that mean for the self? Like, why would we develop those skills?
Self-deception is a really interesting question. First of all, how could I possibly tell myself a lie and then also believe what I just told myself as a lie, right? And then second of all, why on earth would I be motivated to do so? It seems like the best thing I could possibly do is understand reality as it is and then try to bluff or use reality to my advantage. And Robert Trivers is the one who proposed an answer to this question famously in the preface to Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene, where he simply said, look, there's pressure on us to lie because we can gain advantages that way. That means that there's pressures on those who we're lying to detect the deception, and that introduces a co-evolutionary struggle where each animal or person develops a new strategy and then a counter strategy to detect that. And one way of short-circuiting this co-evolutionary struggle or adding a new weapon to it is to lie to yourself first. Because if I can lie to myself first and convince me, well then I'm not lying when I tell it to you, and whatever cues I typically emit when I'm lying, well, they're not being emitted anymore. And so that's the underlying motivation.
So if you can successfully deceive yourself, you're no longer actually deceiving anyone else.
That's
because
right.
From your perspective, you're telling the truth.
That's exactly right. And so you won't emit any of the cues of conscious deception. Now, of course, that doesn't answer the question of how we do deceive ourselves, but that proves to be a lot easier than you'd think. And when we think about deception, we think about telling a lie. And so I tell you, Blake, I wasn't at the bowling alley on Friday night. But deception is more than just that. Deception is also hiding the truth. It's avoiding the truth. It's a lot of things. And so if you think that I'm having an affair with your wife and you say, Bill, were you at the bowling alley on Friday night? And I don't want to answer the question because it's not a good answer. I can say, Blake, I really love your tie. Where did you get that? And if I do a good job, you go, oh yeah, I got this tie at Harrods or wherever I got it. And the conversation gets derailed and I've deceived you, but I've never told you a lie. Well, we do the exact same thing with ourselves all the time. We learn the news that we want and we know there may be other contrary news around the next corner and we just don't look. You bought some item on a sale, you don't see what tomorrow's sale item goes for. Now, not all of us do this because self-deception is something that some of us will do some of the time, others rarely, others often. It varies, of course. But the notion is that we can deceive ourselves just as easily by avoiding the truth, by casting doubt on the truth, by learning some of the truth and not all of it. And these things are actually much easier to do than you might imagine.
So there's quite a bit of research evidence already from things like post-choice dissonance reduction, where you see the thing that you chose in a much more positive light than the thing you didn't choose.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Dissonance is a great example of self-deception. How else do you get to this sudden change in attitudes, right? Self-serving biases are a great example of self-deception. The key about all these things is that if you didn't actually believe your own lie, well, then they wouldn't work. And so in dissonance reduction, when I decide that the album I chose is better than the album I didn't choose, I have to focus on its positive features, and I do it in a way where I'm using cognitive processes to get there, but I'm using them in a biased fashion to get to the answer that I want.
And you end up genuinely believing that you chose the right thing.
You end up genuinely believing in the choice you made, and there's lots of great evidence for these sorts of processes across all of social psychology.
So what does your research on self-deception tell us then about people's strategies or motivations for self-deception?
Well, in social psychology in the past, what we've always done is treated this problem as a way of trying to make myself feel better, to restore the integrity of the self. From our perspective, though, it has nothing to do with restoring the integrity of the self. It has to do with persuading you, with persuading others. Now, it turns out that you can use a lot of those same social psychology paradigms and show that, in fact, the motivation is actually to then convince others that you're a reasonable human being, that your actions make sense, that you're a healthy individual, all those sorts of things. And so what we've done in our lab is simply take these old great paradigms and twist them around to you have to convince somebody else. And we get the exact same processes at play. People show the same biases they do in the classic literature. And the beauty is, in showing those biases, they become more persuasive for other people. So others then regard them as having told a more persuasive story if they first convinced themselves.
So self-deception is a way to really sort of maximize your success socially then.
That's exactly right. If I can convince the world that I'm Bill plus 20%, then the world's going to give me what a Bill plus 20 would get. If I'm only just Bill, then I'm not going to get nearly as many things as I might like to have.
So it's actually quite functional then to be good at deception, particularly with the self, because it helps you deceive other people then.
That's right, to be good at deception and also to know your own weaknesses. And so, for example, in my case, I have terrible source memory. I can never remember who said what. Well, what that means is that if you and I collaborate, I'll think that all the good ideas were mine because I can't remember that you came up with them. And so I become very good at self-deceiving with where the good ideas came from, but other aspects of my psychology aren't so malleable. And so that's probably a strategy that I'll use. You might use a different strategy depending on where your sort of short-sightedness or where the holes are in your memory.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Bill.
Sure.